Thank you for taking time out of your day to participate in corporate risk management for emerging trends. Our primary speaker today is Don Aviv. Don is the Chief Operating Officer of Interfor International, a company that routinely handles complex investigations and security projects for Fortune 500 companies globally. Mr. Aviv is a board-certified protection professional, a board-certified physical security professional, a licensed New York State private investigator. In his spare time, he's vice chairman of ASIS, International Security Services Council. He is a security advisor to Canary Connect, Guidewire, and other safety and security technology companies. He has extensive experience in corporate fraud investigations, physical and cyber security consulting, crisis mitigation, threat assessments, business risk, corporate investigations, and intelligence gathering. I could spend a half hour going into detail about Don's extensive background and biography, but instead I think I'm just going to turn it over to Don. Don?
Thank you. First of all, I would like to thank everyone for joining us on this webinar. I know your time is extremely valuable, so I'll try to move relatively quickly through the slides and concepts so that we have time for a Q&A at the end, which in my opinion is where the real discussions always happen when it comes to webinars. I also acknowledge that our audience is quite diverse with representation from small companies all the way to some of the largest, in addition to nonprofits and other types of organizations. Therefore, I will endeavor to speak in generalities and at a relatively high level so as to not lose anyone in the weeds and minutiae. Today, we are discussing 4 emerging trends, both negative and positive, that we've been tracking through late 2016 to early 2017. Okay, moving on. Next slide. All right, next, right. All right. As many of you well know, the security industry has become over-commoditized as a result of the incredible pace of technological advancements. There seems to be a new type of security software application and new type of hardware on almost a quarterly basis. This has led to what I consider to be a sales-driven industry, not a protection-driven industry. Annual budgets are being planned around incremental expenditures, not actual security needs. I'm sure many of you have been noticing this in and around your organizations as you consider and conceptualize new additions of hardware, software, and other technology types. Many companies are not making strategic security decisions based on needs, but more on keeping up with advancements and tech upgrades. There's always been a push for keeping up with the Joneses and making sure you have the latest and greatest. Many of you on the call come from medium to large size corporations, which means I bet you guys are bombarded by your security integrators whenever a new camera or device or widget comes to market. In my view, this is unnecessary and quite frankly unacceptable. Well, you know, at the end of the day, what was so wrong about your security hardware from last year or the year before or even 3 or 4 years ago? Probably nothing. So at the end of the day, why do you need to upgrade? The answer is, and as we all know, much of it comes from a fear of losing budget allocations, which has become a pervasive issue. If you don't allocate expansions and upgrades and additions for next fiscal year, you may lose that budget, which will go to somebody else or some other department. Therefore, in my opinion and the opinion of other security consultants, physical security has become more about megapixels, bandwidth, and analytic capabilities as opposed to our main focus of protecting people and assets. So the underlying goal should be to keep pace with the threat vectors facing your companies and organizations, not what is new on the market. So we deem this to be a negative trend, definitely worth avoiding. Next. Drilling down further, I'm always surprised about how few companies consider the total cost of ownership when considering new technology acquisition. It's very easy to focus on line item pricing when it comes to build-outs of new security systems, but you really sit down with your finance teams to think about ongoing maintenance, the costs of add-ons, and the need for additional hardware and software on a long-term basis. If not, you certainly should. Also, do you propose security upgrades and expansions to fit your specific needs? My overarching message around this topic is to think long-term. 5 years at a minimum, 10 years optimally. I know that may sound crazy, but the exercise of doing so could certainly pay dividends in the long run. To sum up this section, it is our belief that there is a negative trend towards over-reliance on security technology and constant upgrades as opposed to long-term security planning based on today's needs and tomorrow's expected needs. So I urge you to plan ahead based on realities of the risks that you could perceivably face. Next. All right, moving on. We're now going to be on emerging trends of workplace violence awareness and response, which is, as we all know, a hot-button topic in this day and age. As with everything in the security world, your starting point should always be a needs assessment when considering how to approach workplace violence and prevention. Workplace violence is a pervasive issue that will never fully go away. If you're a CSO or a CEO of a company or even a line item or a line officer, you can hope and pray all you want, but these issues are here to stay, both as insider and outsider threats. And that's a topic that we don't consider enough as a general security population. There's a definite delineation between insider and outsider threats when it comes to workplace violence, although they often get bucketed together into one lump sum. So this issue exists for small companies and organizations all the way up to the largest. No matter how much good your company does in the world, this will always be a problem for your organization. At the end of the day, companies are staffed and led by real people, people who have lives outside of work, issues, problems, and pressures, which at any time can boil over and make their way back to the work. There are countless stories of incidences that have started off at home, domestic issues, problems between family members. Someone gets pissed off during their home life and brings it to the office. Someone sets them off, and the next thing you know, you have a workplace violence issue. That is a very, very highly common sub-theme when it comes to workplace violence. So drilling down a bit further, there is a huge misconception out there. Whenever people discuss workplace violence, they automatically think we are talking about active shooter situations. Albeit while active shooter situations represent the scariest types of situations, it is very far from common, while other types of workplace violence is extremely common. Just to give you a little bit of background, the DOJ collected statistics indicating that 1 in 4 employees will be victimized in the workplace. That includes harassment, threats, or physical attacks without a weapon. That's 1 in 4. Those numbers are pretty scary. There are around 18,000 assaults logged at the workplace each week in the U.S. That's 18,000 each week. And if you do the number, and OSHA has run the numbers, they attribute a total loss of $121 billion annually to U.S. corporations. That's not chump change. Those are significant numbers that have significant trickle-down effects into corporations across the boards. And to throw a couple more numbers at you guys, OSHA also says that 2 million workers a year are affected by some form of workplace violence. I mean, those numbers are astronomical, but we don't often hear about it. What we do hear about are the active shooter incidents. While scary and definitely something that should make the news, don't represent the lion's share of workplace violence incidents. So while the types of attacks are extremely diverse, so are the training programs available to companies today. When thinking about training programs, you need to conduct an assessment in order to determine what type of program or programs would best fit your organization. As a security consultant, I rarely advocate for straight out-of-the-box solutions or one-size-fits-all training. They simply do not work, and they do not mitigate enough of the potential threats. Next slide. I always urge clients to focus on prevention and not reaction, and that's an underlying theme for most security professionals when it comes to workplace violence. You can obviously react to many things given the right tools, but if you prevent it, you won't have the issue to begin with. So prevention is something that you can drill on, you can set matrix to, and communicate about in an ongoing manner. Reaction to workplace violence training is limited to mitigating an active threat. While important, it only handles one side of the coin, leaving you vulnerable. We, as a company, believe in the team approach. Create a working group to consider all threat vectors, have discussions up and down your organization to determine where the issues might occur, i.e., whether it's the mailroom, the warehouse, labs, or even the boardroom. If we had more time, I would tell you about a physical fight in a boardroom of a very large company that we had to deal with a couple of years ago. It was quite, I mean, you really can't make this stuff up, but when the CFO and the CEO are slugging it out in the middle of the, over the oak and marble table, that's really something that you can't make up. But ultimately, keep in mind, these types of things can happen anywhere and at any time. The lion's share of workplace violence issues occur amongst coworkers. How do you prepare for that, and how do you ultimately prevent it? It ultimately comes down to awareness and training. Awareness and training, again and again and again and again. I can't stress that enough. Study after study has shown that the active participation in training and awareness programs can greatly mitigate the threats posed by workplace violence events. That's not just me saying that. There have been multiple academic studies, government studies, law enforcement studies that back up the concept of prevention as opposed to reaction. And remember, this is not just limited to active shooter scenarios. You should focus on de-escalation training, threat identification training, establishing anonymous hotlines, creating human resource training modules. Let your coworkers know that they have an outlet for their stress before it boils over and becomes a problem for the workplace. But again, de-escalation training is not discussed enough. I mean, back in the day, if any of you remember, there were all these courses about verbal judo and a lot of other courses like that. And that's going back 15, maybe even 20 years. We advocate for bringing those programs back because they truly and definitely help. You definitely need to train your people to look out for early signs of potential violence that could greatly diminish potential risks. Next. So, ultimately it comes down to pairing your organization with the appropriate training concepts. There is a whole cottage industry sprouting around workplace violence training these days. There are hundreds of methods, concepts, ideas, from the theoretical all the way down to the hands-on programs. But only you know what might work for your organization. Historically, everyone repeated the mantra of run, hide, fight. Run, hide, fight, run, hide, fight. But does that even apply if you are a hospital or an elementary school? We believe these guidelines are too generic and too outdated. You need a customized approach to meet your specific needs, threats, and vulnerabilities. What works for a hospital or a child care setting may not be optimal on a college campus or even a corporate campus or even a small satellite office. So you need to really sit down and consider what are your threat vectors, what are you dealing with, and how do you train your specific environment. Technology can help, but should not replace proper training and drilling. We're hearing a lot about 3D CAD mapping and target acquisition tracking systems, which are all hot and new and fantastic and could definitely help, but they should not replace old school training and communication. Let's not forget that, ultimately you might be alone. There's a whole entire movement around self-reliance training that has spiked significantly in the past 2 years. This is the concept that law enforcement might not be available. They may not make it in time to your office if there's a workplace violence issue or even an active shooter issue. So how do you self-rely on your security staff, your corporate staff, and your coworkers to mitigate the issue before it boils over into something extremely violent? Companies should focus on how they handle terminations. This is something I can't stress enough. Letting people go tends to be a primary influencer of internal workplace violence. The old adage that if you fire someone and they're disgruntled, they'll come back and do something, that there is merit to that concept, and we still hear about it. And most of the violent attacks that have happened in the U.S. Resulted of termination, expected termination, or just the belief that, hey, I'm going to get fired and I'm going to go take it out on my boss before it happens, even if that's a reality or not. So you need to review your procedures, determine ways of making the process more humane and conscientious while increasing vigilance and response preparation. When it comes to training, we advocate for ongoing and dynamic systems. Everything from tabletop drills, which are highly effective while being relatively cost efficient, all the way to monthly email blasts and case studies, all the way to live drills. We've even heard of companies employing actors to conduct real-life drills to test security responses. I mean, that's great. There are liability issues with that, and I can see that it can become problematic if you don't pre-announce. But ultimately, we advocate for proactive approaches rather than reactive approaches. Excuse me. You need to ask yourselves how you and your company are handling workplace violence issues today and where you think you should be, and then ultimately work backwards to create an action plan. Be comfortable engaging subject matter experts around this. As I said, there are many schools of thought, many beliefs as how this should happen and unfold, so don't be shy, reach out to experts, talk about what's new, what's great, but also what has been effective for all these years. Next slide. So now we're switching gears to focusing on employees that are not in the office or on campus. This reflects the vastly growing number of road warriors and external workers that many of the companies listed on the call today are dealing with and have employed. Historically, this was not a significant concern for corporations and entities, but now that liability concerns have caught up to us, this has become a growing concern. Ultimately, as we all know, it takes a lawsuit or a threat of a lawsuit to inspire the security industry into action, but for whatever reason, we are here today and we're dealing with the lone employee and mobile employee. So, who or what is a lone employee? I define them as any employee that travels for their company or works out of a home office or small office, which could pretty much be a number of people in every organization. Companies have a distinct duty to protect them just as they would anyone sitting at corporate headquarters. These are the new changes that are coming out down in liability laws. Any employee, whether they work in-house or out-house or abroad, are your responsibility regardless of the situation. But ultimately, how do you deal with this trend? I mean, most security departments don't have resources to cover all this, so it comes down to planning and training and thinking about it. This concern is definitely a fast-moving trend and one that will only become more relevant in the coming years. A few stats to back this up. There will be approximately 105 million mobile workers in the U.S. by 2020. 105 million mobile workers in the U.S. by 2020. That is a significant and almost scary number of people that are not going to be housed in your corporate offices full-time. 92% of C-suite executives and 58% of small business owners use a flexible or off-site working model. Those are very significant numbers. Yet, if you think about it, only 31% of C-suite executives and 32% of small business owners have appropriate security policies and procedures to govern their time out of the office. Those numbers are not great, and apparently, unless we do something about it, will only get worse. There's a definite ROI on improving these negative statistics. HR specialists will tell you time and time again that protecting and supporting mobile and lone employees can greatly improve employee satisfaction and productivity while costing relatively little to accomplish. So this clearly should be a focus of corporate security groups everywhere as you go into 2017 and 18 in preparation for 2020, when many even of you on the call will be working outside of the office and remotely. Next slide. So, how do you accomplish this task? Well, first things first, you need to ensure that you can both locate and communicate with employees at the drop of a hat and under complex and stressful situations. Nothing is more important than having direct and indirect means of contact your mobile employees during times of crisis of any kind. We are talking about weather situations all the way to law enforcement or military actions. Again, if we had more time, I could bore you with stories about trying to locate and track employees caught in the middle of civil unrest and periods of anarchy abroad. I have countless anecdotes of supporting companies that have employees trapped in flood zones, in hurricanes, or just missing and might be dead or in jail. So this is, if any of you have workers abroad or traveling, which I know for a fact most of you do, this is an ongoing struggle because you're also balancing the concept of how open and private do you want your employees to be? If you're using company devices, connectivity could be an issue. If they're using private devices, do they want to share apps, etc. So, one of the recent stories that comes to mind was the Paris attacks last year. Numerous, and there were a number of U.S. companies that had to scramble to locate and communicate with their employees overnight during that time of crisis. So, the good news is that much of this can be accomplished with relatively straightforward tech-focused tools in addition to active and ongoing training. The last thing you want to do is wait until problems occur to realize that you have trouble connecting with employees. These are things that need to be settled today, not tomorrow. Today, not tomorrow. So I guess that leads me to the next and final emerging trend, and that is global employee communication and location awareness. For that, I'm happy to shut up and turn the mic over to my good friends at Rave.
Thanks, Don. This is David Battistini speaking. I'm the product manager for Rave Mobile Safety's critical communications platform. It's a combination of Rave Alert and Rave Guardian. And as Don was just describing, there are a whole number of ways that technology tools can help in all of these different emerging trends. What I like to look at it is all of these have a common thread that are weaved between each and every single one of those trends, and that's communication. The better we can communicate with our employees, the better we can make it easier for our employees to communicate with us, the better we can mitigate all of these individual threat vectors. So whether that's a need to reach all of your employees in minutes with a couple of clicks of a mouse, being able to identify exactly who's in an area. You know, in all Don's war stories, I'm sure they all start with an event happening, and then the second question is, do we have anyone there? And then there's that kind of awkward pause that happens in the meeting room where everyone's trying to like, okay, well, let's go check travel itineraries, let's go check here. Well, all of your employees have a device on them today that can help communicate with them in the event of an emergency. So we provide a really fast and easy way through our platform to be able to reach out to those individuals and ensure that they are okay and that they have the assistances that they need. If they don't, we provide follow-up mechanisms to be able to engage with those employees, provide them additional information. So it's not just about the event. You know, these really are including improving the employee safety. So when it comes to the workplace violence, as Don was saying, it's all about awareness and training. Setting up really easy ways to communicate, to have your employees communicate potential risks to the security staff is ultimately an easy way to help mitigate these ongoing threats. You can empower your employees to report this information discreetly in such a way that you're prepared or at least aware of a potential issue, before it happens or before it erupts, right? No one has any idea what happens in someone's personal life. They show up at the office. Some of those signs can be watched for through training, and now you have an easy way to close out that cycle. So everyone has this training, everyone knows what's to watch for, but now you have through tipping and putting easy ways of in the hands of your employees to communicate with safety officials allows you to take that training and really turn it straight into action for your employees. And lastly, those lone workers, right? They're out there. What do you want to do in the event of a scenario? You can arm them with all of your safety plans, right? We spend all this money, going through these what-if scenarios. What if this happens? What if that happens? We have these big binders that sit on shelves that are all dusty, that when something happens, we pull them off. Well, what if we could put those in the hands of our employees so that if something happens, you have that self-reliance that Don was speaking about. They have all the information right then and there to help arm them throughout these events. At the end of the day, what we here at Rave really feel is the most important thing we can help you accomplish is making it really easy for you to communicate with your employees and your employees to communicate with you. We know what an emergency notification system can provide to a business, whether it's something as simple as a building closure due to weather or an update about a particular event. There are ways to get important and pertinent information from your organization to your employees. Well, that's great. There's the value of that emergency communication platform. We can turn that around and spin it around and say you could actually use that same emergency communication platform to help those of you that are on this call that are responsible for employee safety to gather that information directly from your employees. So just like Rave can be the emergency communications platform delivering all of that pertinent information from you to your employees, through the Rave Guardian app, right in the palm of their hands, you actually have your own little emergency communication platform that allows your employees to communicate directly with you. So with that, I'm actually, I want to open it up. I don't know if we have any questions in. If you have anything you want Don to dive deeper on, please take the opportunity to type it into the chat. I know, there's plenty of opportunities for you to speak to a raver about our platform. But it's not every day we get someone like Don available here that can pick his brain and ask him to go deep. So if there's anything that you do have, please, on the right-hand side, do leverage that platform.
Yeah, we have one question here. The question, I'll paraphrase it. It's, Don, you mentioned technology, active shooters, workplace violence, training awareness, and other things. How do you prioritize that in a land of limited resources?
Well, it's a great question, but it's an age-old question when it comes to security professionals. I mean, we're always being asked to prioritize what to deal with, what's the threat, and there is no easy answer. The only thing I can say is that you need to look at your organization internally and externally. What are the most viable threat vectors facing your organization? I can say, statistically speaking, if you were to look at construction organizations, places with extensive warehouses, most of the threats they're dealing with are internal workplace violence issues. But, that's not always the same when it comes to various other types of industries. So the quick answer is you need to look at your specific organization, where you are in the world, who hates you, what kind of threats are you going to be facing internally and externally, and come up with a plan to mitigate those threats by order of priority.
Next question. On the technology front, how do you judge the value of a 5-year plan versus a 7-year plan versus a 10-year plan when you've got vendors coming at you 24/7?
Right. I mean, this is one of those things where, we need to consider who we are and who they are. As security professionals within an organization, our job is to protect the company assets and employees. The vendor's job is to sell to us. So, that's very important and that's great, but at the end of the day, do you need to upgrade every year? Do you need to create all these enhancements? Absolutely not. You need solutions that work, and they work for a number of years. The last thing I think you should be doing is switching every year, going out to RFP, or just implementing new technology unnecessarily. So you really need to consider there are salesmen out there and you're the consumer. It's on your time that you need to make these decisions. So when they come at you, if the technology is viable, it's new, and it'll fit a specific need that you have, by all means go down that road. But if it's just an in-service upgrade or a new widget to an existing technology that you have and you don't see the real need, then I don't think that you should really be following that path. Feel free to push back and say no.
That looks like all the questions we have, Don. And first of all, I want to thank you very, very much.